Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. Once again, no Stephen Young this week for me as he is on a little bit of a trip, but it will be me previewing the AutoTrader EchoPark Automotive 400 at Dover Motor Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Sonoma, Shane Van Gisbergen took home the win. He finished ahead of Chase Briscoe and Chase Elliott. He was chased by the two chases. Shane Van Gisbergen picking up his third win of the season. That puts him now third in the most playoff points because of those three wins. So SVG currently sitting pretty in the playoff picture, even though he's all the way down in the 20s in the actual point standings. So I thought Sonoma was a great race. I thought it was fantastic racing. You could pass. There were strategies, which we love. And, we saw some contact. We saw Chris Buescher get loose and get into Ryan Blaney. We saw Chase Elliott take tires with 14 to go, and that really mattered. He's able to charge through the field and finish third, maybe even finish second if he didn't have a little bit of a slip up after he got past Christopher Bell, who ended up finishing fourth. So that was great racing at Sonoma. We have had back-to-back races on either road or street courses. So it is time to go to the oval at Dover. Dover Motor Speedway is a 1-mile concrete track. It is steeply banked with banking around 23 degrees in the turns, even has 9-degree banking on the straightaways, which is pretty unusual for most ovals. So whenever there's a crash at Dover, all the cars get swept down to the inside thanks to the banking, even on the straightaways. But Dover Motor Speedway, like I said, a 1-mile concrete track. We got a few little things this weekend that'll make the racing at Dover potentially a little quirky, a little different from what we've seen in the past. First of all, Dover the past couple years has been run a little bit earlier in the season, right? May, maybe late April, May. Well, now we're running it in July in the heat of the summer. So that heat is going to translate to dropping down rubber and picking it up and making it slicker. But also we have a new tire this weekend. The only time we're running this tire is at Dover this year, and we didn't run it at Dover last year. There was no test here for this tire, so a little bit of an unknown there as well. So I think we have some room to be a little less confident in our picks, and you'll see that. I'm going to be a little careful this week with my picks, but I do have some value for Dover this weekend. But I do think the fact that it's going to be hot, it's going to be slick, is going to matter, and it's going to maybe shake up the favorites a little bit, shake up the mid-pack a little bit, but it is still a 1-mile steep track. You got to have those steep track skills. Concrete matters. Certainly drivers that are good on concrete tracks tend to do well at Dover. So Nashville, you can pull in Bristol if you want. I'll talk about comp tracks in just a moment. I'm not really using Bristol myself, but also just intermediate package speed. We've seen some of these other intermediate tracks race kind of like Dover as well. So let's talk about that. Dover being such a unique track, the only 1-mile true oval, right? 180-degree turns on each end, concrete, steeply banked. It's the only one out there. So how do we handicap Dover, build our sample size so we're not just looking at Dover, past Dover races? Well, the number one comp for Dover, of course, is Dover. I'm going to be leaning heavily on track history. My model pulled in track history as the number two thing other than your equipment being number one. So how are you doing? What's your current form? What's your equipment? That's, of course, the thing that matters most. But number two is how well do you run at Dover? But from there, my model found the best comps from Dover are number one, Nashville. Nashville is 1 1/3 mile concrete track as well, but it races more like those tri-ovals, right? Your 1.5 mile tri-oval type tracks, but it is concrete, so that is very similar. So Nashville is the number one comp for Dover, according to, if we just take 2022, 2023, and 2024, the next gen era, right, where we've raced at Dover, and just look driver by driver, their driver rating at Dover versus their driver rating at other tracks, and do the same thing for average running position. We find Nashville is the number one comp. Then there's a little bit of a tier down. So Nashville's very clear number one comp, but there's a tier down, and next in that comp list is Kansas and Charlotte. You can rank them whatever order, 2, 3. They're pretty much neck and neck, 2, 3 for the next best comps to Dover. Both of those are 1.5 mile tracks, and interestingly enough, earlier this year, we ran Kansas, Charlotte, and Nashville back to back to back for races 12, 13, and 14 on the season. So we should have some good comps here. And then there's another tier down, which I am not including, but is a tier above everything else, right? And everything else I'd kind of just put in the current form category. So that third tier, so the fourth and fifth most comparable tracks are Las Vegas, which I think makes sense given Kansas and Charlotte were, and Las Vegas is another 1.5 miles. And then oddly enough, the fifth one is Pocono, and that doesn't make sense to me. So that's why I'm leaving that third tier off of Vegas and Pocono. Maybe you want to keep Vegas in, leave Pocono off, but they were pretty much neck and neck in terms of correlation between driver rating at Dover and driver rating at those tracks for each driver, and similar for average running position. So there's a very clear top 5: 1 Nashville, 2, 3 Charlotte, Kansas in whatever order, and then 4, 5 Vegas, Pocono in whatever order you want there. So I'm going to be focusing heavily on the top 3, but of course Dover history as well. Finally, a little bit of some intangibles. I think this is going to be very interesting to keep an eye on Chase Briscoe this weekend. He is in that number 19 Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota. Martin Truex Jr. raced that number 19 Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota for many years prior to this and was always dominant, super good at Dover. So theoretically, this track should be good for Chase Briscoe, but he hasn't been amazing here at Dover in his Cup career. But that said, he's been good on some of these similar tracks. You know, in the Xfinity Series, he was good at Dover. So I don't know if it just hasn't clicked on the Cup level yet, or if it just wasn't the right team, you know, being at Stewart-Haas. So I think it's going to be very important to keep an eye on Chase Briscoe this weekend. My model's not low on him, but it's also not high on him. It's just kind of right in line with the market. So I think it's going to be important to, like I said, keep an eye on that number 19 Toyota, see how he looks in practice. So with that said, it is time to dive into our bets. As always, I'll drive through the race stage by stage, giving a shorter odds bet in stage 1. Then in stage 2, I'll give a little bit longer odds bet. Finally, of course, we will drive through stage 3 and roll into victory lane and talk about victory lane there as well. So we are going to throw the green flag on the AutoTrader EchoPark Automotive 400 and fire off for stage 1. All right, for my stage 1 pick, I am going to go with a top 10 bet, get a little conservative here, but I'm going to go to Ryan Preece for a top 10. You can get that at plus 240 at BetMGM. I think that is probably the best odds out there. I haven't seen anything longer than plus 240. I know earlier in the week he was closer to plus 260. Actually, there's a plus 250 right now as I click through at Bet365. So plus 250 at Bet365 is the best odds available on Ryan Preece's top 10 bet. The reason I'm going to go with Ryan Preece here is not so much for his Dover history, which hasn't been bad. It's been totally fine, but he checks all the boxes on the comp tracks, especially since he has moved to Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing this year. So if we look at Ryan Preece at the comparable tracks, he has just been an absolute monster. We'll start with Nashville. Now, he didn't have a great run here this year at Nashville, but last year at Nashville with that Stewart-Haas Racing Ford, he finished 4th. And then if we look at Kansas and Charlotte, which I said again are the next 2 most comp tracks, for RFK Racing this year, he finished 7th and 9th. If we want to pull in Pocono in Las Vegas, he finished 3rd and 8th. So in other words, in the most recent race at each of the 5 tracks other than Nashville, if we go back to this last year's Nashville, he's finished inside the top 10 in all of them. Okay, so let's say we count this year's Nashville as well, then it's all but one of them. So he's just done fantastic at the comparable tracks to Dover. And Dover's been a decent track for him as well. Now, he used to run in 2019 through 2021 for JTG Doherty Racing. He never finished better than 26th in the point standings. So I'm going to compare his Dover finish to his point standings finish. And in 2019 at Dover, finished 28th, which not great when you're finishing 26th in the points, but then he finished 19th, 7 spots better than his point standings finish. In 2020, he finished 29th in points, but he finished 25th and 26th in the 2 Dover races, a little bit of improvement. And then in 2021, he finished 27th in the points, but he finished 18th at Dover, so 9 places ahead. Then we can look at 23 and 24 again with Stewart-Haas Racing. Finished 17th at Dover in 2023, despite finishing 23rd in points. And then in 2024, he had a DNF at Dover. So we kind of removed those DNFs just because they happen. You know, they're highly random. But his finishes, when he hasn't had a major issue, have pretty much all been better than his season-long point standings finish. Well, he's currently 14th in the season-long points. So if you give him a few spots better than 14th, that's a top 10 finish right there. He's finished top 10 at all the other comparable tracks. If we want to go all the way back to Xfinity Series, finished 4th at Dover, which is one of his best finishes of the year in 2018. But you get the idea. Ryan Preece checks the boxes at Dover. It is a good track for him. It is above average track for him. And he's been very good at all the comparable tracks. So Ryan Preece for a top 10, plus 250 at Bet365. Totally fine with plus 240 at BetMGM as well. I have him a little more than 36% to finish inside the top 10. So, I think there is some unknowns as I talked about. So I wouldn't go all the way, to the 36% number. But if you play this down to like plus 200, a little longer than plus 200, maybe plus 205, right? That's 33% implied odds. So I'm totally fine playing it down to the low 2 number. I just wouldn't bet it with a 1 in front of the number for Ryan Preece's top 10 finish. So that is stage 1. My stage 1 pick, once again, Ryan Preece, top 10. We are going to throw the green and white checkered on stage 1, fill up, get some tires, and fire off for stage 2. Okay, stage 2 here. This is another pretty good value that I have here, and I'm going to go a little more aggressive. I'm going to take the upside of this driver, and I'm going to take Josh Berry for a top 5 finish. You can get that at 8-1 at Bet365. It's also available plus 750 at BetMGM. Totally fine with that number as well. Dover, a fantastic track for Josh Berry. If we look at his 2 races in actual real equipment in the Cup Series at Dover, he finished 10th with Hendrick Motorsports 2 years ago, and he finished 14th last year with Stewart-Haas Racing here at Dover. And again, Stewart-Haas Racing was not a great team last year. They were kind of folding. They're out of the sport this year, and now it's just Haas Racing with one car for Cole Custer. So, it's a spot where I think Josh Berry was in some inferior equipment, still made the most of it and got a 14th place finish when, Josh Berry that year finished in the 20s in terms of the point standing, 27th in the point standing. So he's finished 13 spots better than his point standings. Well, Josh Berry's 21st in the points right now. So if we did 13 spots better than that, that's an 8th place finish. Now, I'm not going to say exactly that's what's going to happen, but we can look at more track history for Josh Berry in the Xfinity Series. And he raced 3 times in the Xfinity Series at Dover, and he finished 2nd, 1st, and 2nd. Pretty much doesn't get much better than that. So this is a fantastic track for Josh Berry. He's also one of those drivers where, Dover really feels like it should be a driver's track, especially if it's hot and slick. I think that could play into the drivers, who really are able to kind of dirt track it around or find different lines, find different grooves. So I think this is going to be a Josh Berry type of race, which is why I like playing his upside here. Let's also look at the comparable tracks this year. He finished 6th at Kansas, so that's a top 10 finish. 12th at Charlotte. So those 2 right there average a 9th place finish. Remember, those are 2 and 3 on the comp list. At Nashville, he finished 30th. That's not great. But then at Las Vegas and at Pocono, the other 2 kind of lower tier comps, he won Las Vegas and he finished 12th at Pocono, right? So an average of 6.5 from those 2. So overall, he has been pretty good at the comparable tracks as well. Nashville arguably has been his worst one. But, I think that's just a spot where Nashville and Dover, they still do race different. Nashville's not steeply banked. Dover is. So I'm not going to just say because Nashville's the best comparable track, all of a sudden he's not going to be good here, because he's shown he is good at Dover. So I want to play Josh Berry's upside here. I have him, depending on which model you use, around 12.5%, which would be like 7-1 is fair odds for a top 5, all the way up to around 16 or 17%, depending on how much I weigh Dover versus the comp tracks. If you weigh Dover more, you're more like 16% for a top 5 finish, which means you could bet this down to 5-1. I like to be conservative and use my blended model. So I'm fine playing this down to 7-1 for Josh Berry for a top 5 finish. So stage 2, I'm going to take Josh Berry for a top 5 finish at 8-1, plus 750 is totally fine. And again, recapping stage 1, I had Ryan Preece top 10 plus 250. So that is it for stage 2. We're going to throw the green and white checkered on stage 2, drive through stage 3, cross the start finish line, and head on in to victory lane. And for victory lane, we've done this before. We've done this one time before on the podcast, but I do not have a victory lane pick. What I want to say for victory lane, I think, is very important, though. Practice and qualifying, especially practice, you got to pay attention to it. We have, like I said, hotter than it probably has been in years past at Dover, a new tire. So these are all things that we need to flesh out. I talked about Chase Briscoe, really want to see him in practice. And flags, my flags metric for practice, which again stands for field level adjusted green speed. It's basically a true speed metric where I look lap by lap at how you're performing compared to every other driver on the same lap. Well, for flags, it has been awesome this year, especially at the intermediate tracks like Kansas, like Charlotte. Two of the best results for flags this year were the two of the best comps for Dover, Nashville as well, Las Vegas as well, right? So a lot of these best comparable tracks, flags absolutely smashed it. Drivers that did well in practice, and not just in the basic metrics like your 1 or 5 or 10 or 15 lap averages, but the lap by lap comparisons to the whole field and adjusting for which group they went out, I think has made a huge difference this year. So make sure to really focus on practice. And a lot of my bets, even if you don't have access to flags, which is part of the Roto Grinders package, if you don't have access to flags, I will still be tracking my bets as always in the Action Network app. Nick_Giffen there is my username in the Action app. So heavily going to pay attention to practice, which is why I'm starting off this week light with just 2 bets on my 2 best values, Ryan Preece top 10 and Josh Berry top 5. So that is going to do it for us. Thanks again for listening to the AutoTrader EchoPark Automotive 400 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. If you'd like to tail some of the bets we discussed today, look for the quick slip links in the podcast and video descriptions. Go to actionnetwork.com/bet now. We'll be back with Stevie next week to talk bets for the Brickyard 400, the finale of the in-season challenge. So we'll be back again next week to talk Brickyard 400. On behalf of Stevie, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you back here on Running Hot from Action Network.